go. That's me. So, there we go. So I'm glad you all made it in this morning. Both, I heard the 95 and the Parkway were really bad, and I'm happy to announce that in about 30 years, autonomous vehicles will solve all of that problem. So you'll be all set. But in the short time we have this morning, I'd like to go through some things about the Internet of Things and security and what we should be thinking about. And I'll talk about it in a couple of different ways. One is, what is it, and why do I care about it? What are the good things, and what are the risks that we have to face as business people? And I'll also give some perspective from Pitney Bowed on how we've dealt with it as a provider of products to our customers, and also try to give some of their perspective. And I'm going to do that in about 16 or 17 minutes. So, let's see. So what is it and why do I care? Really, if you look at the Internet of Things, the easiest thing I think to think about is it's any device that's connected to a network that is not a smartphone, a computer, or a tablet. And you'll see all kinds of things about what objects can we connect, and it's pretty much everything. And so you'll see diagrams like these two, where you've got planes connected, you've got bicycles in some cases, it will show. We've seen the Nest thermostats and lights and things like that. So all kinds of things are connected, and this data from them is collected and goes somewhere into cyberspace, right? And we use it, and it makes all of our lives better. That's the promise of it. Some of the things that people have said about it sound more to me like WALL-E. If you ever go back to that cartoon, right, and you see the people sitting on their chairs and robots and everything being taken care of for them, and they're just sitting there eating, getting fat. Some of them sound like that. Others make it sound like, Iron Man, where we all become superheroes wearing these devices and everything happens for us. It's somewhere in between. So what does it enable? Right? We get these devices connected. What can we do? And this is just a small list of the kind of benefits that we get from it. Right? One is, if you look at cars, a big part of it is device manufacturers or businesses doing proactive maintenance on devices. So if you think of it, assume your car is connected and it's about to fail. Wouldn't it be nice if you knew that and it directs you to the closest garage, or makes sure that you can do the maintenance before you're actually left on the side of the road? Now with a car, that's one thing. When you start talking about industrial equipment, it's another, and it makes a big difference. And we'll talk about that a little bit in terms of large equipment and also small equipment and what that means. If we go around the circle here, sort of optimizing your operations, that's also a big one, right? Larry mentioned that data is important. So the more data you have, the more you have to protect, but also the more you can analyze and optimize how things are operating. Remote monitoring, right? Security, it's nice to be able to see things from a distance, to be able to have data being analyzed and understand that there are problems going on. So having facial recognition on cameras to track people who are maybe don't have the best intentions, being able to do things from a distance is important. Customer engagement, having an app on your customer's smartphone that interacts with devices that are in your retail establishment or in your business, or understanding how they use your equipment. So it may not be that they have an app on their smartphone, it may be that in our case they're using a mailing machine, and we understand at what time of day they're mailing, what kind of things they're mailing, how they press buttons on the screen to make it easier for them to do the things that they want to do. So it creates a better experience for your customers. Convenience is another one. We see that so often, being able to turn on your lights as you're driving home, being able to turn on your coffee automatically in the morning, have your alarm clock do it. Some of these things seem to be maybe not exactly what we need to do. And I think they border on, how lazy are we that I can't press the button on my coffee machine. But But there are these use cases that we come up with where you say your alarm clock is going to know from your schedule where you're going, it's going to be set automatically, and then your car is automatically going to warm up in the morning. If there's traffic, everything is going to happen sooner, and you're going to drive in your autonomous vehicle to work. So those are some of the, far out, I think, use cases, but when you start to break them down, you start to see things that are useful. And then the big one, I think, for all of us is that it begins to transform business models. And you look at some of the things, there's a jet engine there that GE has done, is they've changed their whole service model. They've changed their service model by saying, we're going to collect data from these engines, and now we can do the proactive maintenance. We can understand how each engine is being used, and rather than saying every 1,000 hours we're going to maintain it, we're going to maintain it based upon the stress that's on that engine. And so what they've done is they've taken it and they have said, instead of charging a flat fee for each engine, we are going to sell hours of thrust. And they optimize their operations, and it's a much more lucrative business for them, and planes are in the air more often than they're on the ground for maintenance. So it's a good thing for everybody. And then we've seen some of the things around printers where they've changed the ink model to one that's either an on-demand supply or it's one where it's a subscription service and you pay for the page. So those are some of the things that it enables, but there's a lot of risks that come with that. So if we look at the top one I have up there is data, because all of these things are collecting data. And if you deploy Internet of Things applications in your business, data is being collected. Depending upon what it is, it may be your energy consumption data if it's your HVAC system. It may be other things. If they're collecting information from a copier, what are they collecting? From a car, about your driving, what's going to happen with that? If they're medical devices, what happens with that data? And so, as we look at that, we have to look at compromise of customer data. We also have to look at the legal and regulatory violations that can occur as a result of that. If you are a medical company, then you've got all kinds of HIPAA regulations that you have to deal with. Those HIPAA regulations, you may not think of your HVAC system as a part of that. Well, if it's connected on the network, it is, and you have to deal with that, and that can become a problem. Right? There's also the one that we are most familiar with when we think of security is the hackers one. And so you've got these devices that are on your network that are communicating out, and some of them can be controlled remotely. So, they can do things like spread malware, they can open holes in your network, they can allow attackers inside your network. And that, obviously is a big problem. We just have to look to, sort of the poster child for this, right, is Target, where their HVAC system and the credentials that they gave to some of the people who were servicing that so they could service it remotely was responsible in a large part for the compromise of credit card numbers of thousands of their customers. And so that's a big problem. And these doors in can be a big problem. So the other thing is there are hidden costs, which we don't necessarily consider. And the hidden costs are not just the increased IT overhead, but there's also liabilities that we can incur as a result of that. And some of those are just sort of forming. I don't think that the legal frameworks have caught up with this yet, but there are examples of people using smartphones at work in California, and in this case it was to make calls. But one of the things that has happened as a result of that is that they were making business calls, and even though they had plans that were unlimited calling, their employers were found, liable is not the right word, but they had to pay for part of those people's cell phone service. And so when we start talking about IoT devices, many of them are interfaced through a smartphone. And if you have employees and they are changing the lights in their office using their smartphone, there's a potential that could end up being a liability. So all of these risks come into play. And I won't give you answers for all of them, but I'll talk a little bit about how we Pitney Bowed have dealt with this in some of our devices, which are this is actually something that we launched yesterday, but it's been in beta test for a little while. And it's our Clarity product. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but basically the machine down the bottom takes statements, different marketing material, other material, inserts them into envelopes, seals them, and gets them ready for mailing and ships them out. But does it at incredible speeds, and typically places that have these have 5, 10 of them, and they're running 2 shifts a day at least with these. And so from our standpoint, we want to be able to maintain these. You can imagine with all the moving parts that things break, and typically in the past it was a service call, right? So by putting these on networks and getting the data and being able to remotely manage these machines, we can more effectively schedule our service force, get there before these things break, and we can also, in addition to that, look at the customer's performance and make recommendations to them about how they do things. So in this case, what they do is they send machine performance data to an edge device, which is a single device that's at the side of the network I'll talk about in a minute, and it sends the data out. We also do some content filtering before we send the data out to make sure that it's only the data that we expect. So we're whitelisting the data that we send to a cloud service, and then the service is going to analyze this data. Well, what are the customers, right, concerned about in this? If you think about what some of these people are processing, they're processing addresses of their customers, which is available on these machines. It can be health insurance, it can be financial. So all that data is sitting on these machines. And while we're not collecting it, it's on that network. Same thing as if you put your lights on a network and it's on your building network, you may have other data flowing around on that network. Not the best practice in the world to have your IoT devices on the same network as your mission critical data, but it happens. And it can happen on accident sometimes. Just ask Target, right? So in this case, they're really concerned about how we connect things. So we look at the cloud storage and processing. This data comes up in the cloud. What are we doing with it? We have to talk to them about that and ensure that we're handling it properly and they're asking the right questions. We have to ask the right questions for them in some cases. These machines, in their case, are mission critical. It impacts their cash flow. So it's a good place for Internet of Things because it is mission critical, and if these things go down, it affects, as I said, their cash flow. And then, the whole network access and the new attack possibilities. So what we've done with them and what they've really demanded from us is to say, what data do you collect, right? And we've put together some presentations and things to go through with them and say, what is your security approach? And it should be multi-layered. If you are talking to IoT vendors, you should ask them, what is their security approach? What is their philosophy? Because just encrypting the link between the cloud and your device is not enough. And that's what most people will start with. It has to be done, but it certainly is not enough. So, understanding what data is collected is really important. And so, we've gone through that with them. Understanding how this is going to be deployed on your network. In our case, and you can't see it really well, we physically segment this machine network from other networks that they have and have one point going out from the network. And you should look for that with IoT solutions. If they don't have to interact with your network, then and other devices or other systems on your network, they should segment them off, get them off your main network. The other thing to talk about is what kind of certifications do they have. And so there's a whole list. We partnered with GE for this. They have a whole list of certifications for their cloud infrastructure. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it does give you a good starting point. If someone doesn't have those certifications for their cloud-based systems or even for their devices, that should be a big red flag immediately that this hasn't been looked at by other people. And if it hasn't been looked at by other people, well, it has been looked at by other people, but those other people are hackers. So you want it looked at by trustworthy people. So what are some of the questions that you should be asking yourself? And I want to put this in sort of two frames. One is, if you're a consumer of these products, what should you be asking the providers? And what should you be asking yourself? And then secondly, I'll say if you're providing IoT services to someone, what are some of the questions that you should be asking yourself to make sure you're doing the right thing for your customers? So the first one is, do I need this? Right? It may sound simple, but a lot of times people get enamored with the technology or something that it can do and don't ask this question. And so the coffee pot is the one I use as an example. A coffee pot in your home, you know, to have it automatically turn on, or you can start it on your way home or from your alarm clock or whatever, that's nice, right? But you probably don't need it. Is it really critical for you to have in your office so that if it's going to break down, somebody knows about it? You know, I guess, you know, most offices it's not a mission critical device. It's important, right? But not mission critical. If you're a restaurant, your coffee maker is a mission critical device. And so having the vendor be able to remotely access that and know when it's going to fail is really important. Because if they can come and fix it before it breaks or schedule that before it breaks, that's a big deal for you as a restaurant. So it's a simple example, but you need to look at that. You know, looking at, you know, saving money with lights or heating, nice. Do you really need it as part of your business? Some businesses have said yes. There are some businesses that are highly customer-centric, and it's all about the experience. Some architectural and fashion firms have actually networked their lights in their building, and when a customer comes through the door, they look at what that customer is wearing, and somehow in the conference room that they're going to be in, they adjust the lighting so that that person's outfit will look as good as possible in there so that they'll feel better about themselves. I mean, that's taking it to an extreme, but they feel that that's mission critical for them. So the other thing you want to ask is, how will data be collected? Right? What are they going to do? What data are you collecting? Are you going to share it with anybody else? How long are you going to keep it? How is it protected? For your devices, what is your patch plan? How are you going to make sure that these devices are kept up to date? Has your service been tested by an independent lab? What security certifications do you have? You know, do you maintain these certifications? It's nice to get the certification, but a lot of these have to be renewed. And so you want to know about their certifications and their audits. What access to my network as the user do I need to provide? Right? Do I have to open any special ports? And that's both a plus and a minus. If you have to open certain ports, and only those devices are going to be using those ports, in some ways it's easier to monitor. But once you start opening, you know, more and more ports, that's more and more entries in. You know, who's going to connect these devices? Am I going to be the one to do it? Is it my IT department? Are you going to have a technician come in? And what kind of access do I need to give a technician if they're coming in to put these devices on the network? Are connections always going to be from in my network to out of my network? Right? Are they going to be initiated that way, or does this device have to exist on the internet? That's also a red flag. If they can't answer that question, yes, that they're always going to be initiated from inside, that's a problem. And then the bandwidth. Right? You can end up sucking up a lot of bandwidth of your network if the device isn't designed properly, and that happens sometimes. Then as a provider, what data do I need? As a provider, what do I really need, and what do I plan to do with it? And you need to be honest and say, is this data a big asset, you know, that I'm going to be collecting for a number of customers and analyzing? And if I'm doing that, what are the legal implications of that, and how do I have to deal with that? And that's going to vary, you know, most companies here are Connecticut, but as you start moving internationally, that becomes a bigger and bigger issue as a provider. And we deal with that with our products, where we've got to set up data centers in certain countries because data is not allowed to leave the country. And when you start talking about cloud computing, that gets even harder to prove that that is going to stay in the country, and there's all kinds of regulatory requirements that are a problem. Do I need remote access? What are not only the data safety concerns, but the physical safety concerns? We have physical safety concerns with our devices because they have motors and things. So remote access is important for us, but it is always attended remote access, really for two reasons. One is from a security standpoint, and the other is from a safety, because we don't want to be starting motors running when somebody's hand is sitting inside of a device. So there's safety concerns, there's also legal concerns. How will I keep these devices up to date? And what kind of access does that mean that I need to provide? And then, what certifications do I need? I should be looking for certifications for my devices and what I need to provide. So that's, in 17 minutes, I guess, the quick overview. I can take a couple, one or two questions, but I'll also be on the panel. I don't know how we'll work that, but thank
you. Great. Crypto is the glue that's going to hold all this together. Pitney Bowed has special competence in crypto. Where do you get it and how do you maintain it?
Yeah, so I would say crypto is a part of the glue that holds this together. Crypto, in a lot of ways, is the algorithms and how to do things is becoming more and more standard. The real thing with cryptography is around the key management and how that's done. I would use, if you don't have it, it takes a while to gain that competence. The best thing to do is to start with consultants who are really knowledgeable in the field.
Both of them?
Both of them, yeah. So, but I think when we look at crypto, that's just one piece of the puzzle. There are so many examples of systems that have been compromised that have cryptography in them, and very often it is not the cryptography, almost all the time, it's not the cryptography that has been compromised. It's a human process around it, it's some other thing that has been put in place. I mean, it can be password recovery is a great example of that, right? You can have really strong passwords, and then the way you recover your password is provided by your mother's maiden name, which people, for some reason, actually give the mother's maiden name when they answer that question, right? And so that's really easy to socially engineer that and get around some of the protections that are there. So you have to look at the entire system, not just the crypto.
Rick, thank you for this wonderful presentation. In a very high level, things about you talking about this business transformation. And I believe you already thought about this because ultimately it's open and closed and the control gateway, all those things, where do you see the boundary? Set the boundary of the interchangeable things linked to the physical objects, which can cause tremendous damage. So there's a lot of things which is really beyond a small company or enterprises control. So what do you see that the trend and thought?
Yeah, I think I would not be the first one to use a technology. I think particularly if I was a small business, unless it was something that would give me significant competitive advantage. So I think if you look at the boundary, I really think it goes back to this question: do I really need this? And what benefit is it going to provide me? How is it going to help my business? Can I wait for that for a little bit to let this sort of settle out? Or do I want to be one of the first ones because it's going to provide me with a tremendous advantage over my competitors?
Thank you.
Yeah. So.
All right, thank you. Another round of applause, I think.
Thank you. Hopefully oh, there we go. All right. Thank you for the intro, and thank you for not reading the whole bio. I'm sure everybody thinks you. So I actually, and that was a great intro because I actually work with the people who do cryptography, so William, maybe at the end I can address further some of your questions. But I'm going to take it down to a slightly lower level, device level. And I think is a good example because we don't necessarily, all of us, think about participating in the IoT daily, as we might, but I assume many of you have a car, and many of you in your car see the air pressure of your tires, or at least an indicator if the air is low in one of your tires. How does that happen? There's an RF device in each wheel communicating to a computer on board of your car. And it uniquely is identifying each tire to that computer. So when you're sitting in the parking lot here, you're not looking at the air pressure of the car next to you. So now you're transmitting a unique ID. And if you know RF, RF is 360 degrees, like any radio signal. And I will tell you, I've been in meetings in Washington where they have, and I can't tell you whether it's happened or not, but discussed, this is years ago, so this is why it may be in place, monitoring the movement of vehicles, cross-border situations, by looking at the IDs coming out of your car tires. Because few of you probably change your car tires or would think to do that in crossing the border. So you are already broadcasting on the IoT a unique metadata ID of yourself by your car. And it goes on from there. So if you said, I don't want to do that, how do you secure your car tires? So as you can see, we could go on and on. We work in devices, and just as a bit of an introduction to what we do, so SecureRF, we're focused on putting data protection encryption technologies on the smallest of devices that are in the Internet of Things, microprocessors, controllers, if you think of Bluetooth even, which arguably is a fairly powerful platform. It's battery operated, low resources, etc. And right down to, in the government credentialing, we're in the final stages of a credentialing system that will identify soldiers to their hardened smartphones in the field, or in the future. So there's a lot of things. We work both in commercial situations, connecting these things to the cloud, but we know that the struggles or the issues go down much lower. So what I'd like to do is just spend some time, and I apologize because and I see what's going on here, so I will translate if necessary. So my slides are the 16:9 format, the HD format, and I see we've got the 4:3 here, so we'll have an interesting physical representation, and I apologize. So IoT large and small. So when we talk about Internet of Things, we think about all these devices, particularly addressable devices, wireless printers, smartphones, medical devices, etc., etc. But they can actually, the devices can actually get relatively small, and thermostats and that. But buildings can be part of the IoT, vehicles, even light bulbs. So there's really a very broad range of IoT devices when we talk about trying to protect them or create security. And again, you may have businesses where you want to give it digital identity, and I would broaden the definition of IoT to giving a digital identity to any object or device, whether it's a container in your shop floor, or even to an employee walking around the building. So it goes well beyond some of these bigger life forms that we think about. And why do we care? Because IoT is big. I mean, I think there's 6 billion and change people in the world, and as you can see, there's a range of projections you can get, but one projection is 26 billion to 30 billion IoT devices in the world in the next 4+ years, so many times more devices than people. And again, each one of these devices could potentially collect data about you, share data about you, or provide access to something that you necessarily were not contemplating when you took on the product, and not contemplating what happens when you connect devices. Unfortunately, I have Dilbert cartoons, but I pulled this one out, which simply reads, "Bad news, the scale is threatening to cut our access off to the fridge." So when you connect the devices, and many of you may step on a Bluetooth scale in the morning, and there's some nominal maintenance things that fridges. I know my wife's, and I say my wife, as in lately me, she's away. My washer dryer in the basement talk to the internet for maintenance purposes. All these things are connected. So what's the ramification? Does it tell you that the device needs servicing, or is it signaling to somebody on the street that nobody's home because it hasn't been on for 4 days? So again, when you add all these digital identities, you have to contemplate what's the impact. So simple thing, why don't we secure? So let's talk about security for a minute and what it is, because oftentimes when I say to people, oh, we do security, they go, oh, you encrypt things. We do, but it's more than that. So you get an email from somebody saying it's Citibank, and we need some information about your account. You can't see them. How do you know it's Citibank? So you need to be able to authenticate who it is. And in a digital world, there's a lot of things that need to be authenticated. There have been some great hacks. We're working with some medical device companies, which you'd think, okay, pumps and other things, you want security, but fitness devices. Reading lately that companies are looking at how to gather your heart monitor info to to identify anomalies and issues so pharmaceutical companies can market the appropriate things to you, Google AdWords on steroids. But what if I don't want to share my medical information, even though I'm broadcasting it everywhere I walk? So again, there are some issues in terms of authenticating who's seeing the data, data integrity, who's changing the data. Is it really the data? Is that really the contract that was circulated and I should now sign or has it been digitally altered? Confidentiality, and again, so encryption and decryption, and even non-repudiation. Did you really send me that piece of information? And it goes on, and these things get put together in a variety of form factors for use. So, IoT and security. So why is it an issue? Well, it's an issue because we all think we have security in our laptops and our wireless routers and our smartphones and tablets, whether it's well implemented or not, as Rick pointed out in his talk. But when you get down to these really, really small devices that were not contemplated when the security you use today was made, because it's all 30 to 40 plus years old. Okay, the current US government standard is something called public key cryptography, which is something called elliptic curve cryptography, 1985, 31 years ago. And RSA, a name people may have heard because it's been around, and again, ECC, or elliptic curve, which is something called the Diffie-Hellman method, invented in Stanford, RSA, at MIT, these are all great things. Never contemplated to run on these very, very small devices. When I talk about small devices, even you may not realize IoT devices like traffic lights. Traffic lights are an IoT device. Most of them have a Wi-Fi connection. And much like the old days of those 4-button codes you'd push on a door to open it, that nobody ever changed, they would install the door locks and it would be 2 and 4 together and whatever it was, I forget the pattern. And 90% of the time that pattern worked wherever you went. 90+% of the traffic lights never changed the administration login. So 6, 7, I'm trying to think of the years ago, one of the Die Hard movies where they controlled the traffic lights in the city so that bad guys could race through and basically took over the infrastructure as part of the heist, as Bruce Willis did his thing. That's all enabled today because most of the Wi-Fi is still set to guest or admin or what have you. And by the way, these devices can be very hard. This is actually a perfect visual cue because why would you do this here? This is one of the computers we work on. This is the entire computer system. And by the way, it's for those of you who can't see, let me help you. That's not the whole computer system. It's actually the black dot in the center of this that's the computer system. Everything around it is just the energy collection antenna. So there's a pinhead there that we run on. And by the way, you can put data and pictures and all sorts of things on there. So when these devices get small, they get hard to secure. And nobody contemplated trying to secure these things. And this runs at 1 megahertz. So it's roughly 2,000 times slower than your laptop. So if you were to use this, for example, for paying for your transit fare, going through a turnstile, if you had really good security, you might wait 30 to 40 seconds for the authentication to happen. You can't wait that long. So we have less security on our devices to accommodate speed and performance. So let me talk about a real-world example just to go through the pieces of why we're concerned about security and IoT devices. Some of you have probably heard about some of this in the past, but I thought it'd be a good place to visit, at least to foster the discussion around devices, put us all on the same page. So vehicles, again, cars, whether they're autonomous in 5 years or 30 years, we've got them here today, and there may be an issue in terms of security on cars as demonstrated this last summer. So what's the issue about cars today? Well, cars now are these large computing platforms. Even a 5 or 6 year old car might have 10 or 12 computers on it. The newer cars are approaching upwards of 100 computers on it, all networked together, using something typically called a microcontroller. There's some pictures on the left, because you've probably seen these chips. I have them in my pocket, but basically these are devices that can take an input, you do a process and give an output and do some thinking and what have you, and that, so it can control the climate system in your car, it can control the brakes in your car, the engine acceleration or deceleration in your car, and on it goes. And as I described here, 16-bit, 1632-bit, 8-bit, these are the channels or buses, the highways for information on these chips. They're small. you know, your smartphones, your tablets, whatever you got in front of you today, those are 64-bit. And when you get up to these bigger platforms and they're powered, life is good, hey, you can provide a reasonable level of security. The problem here, if driver information is using an 8-bit platform, you probably can't wait 30 or 40 seconds for a response if you were to put security on your car. So most of the cars went out without security. So what could go wrong? So very infamously, and you can watch a great video on this if you Google Jeep Cherokee hack Wired. The Wired magazine put up a video on this. Somebody decided to take a look at a 2014 Jeep Cherokee and see what they could do in terms of hacking it. By the way, 2 years before this, a defense contractor we work with was in our offices in Shelton and basically told us they'd done just exactly the same thing, weren't sure what they were going to do with it. Is this a technology that could stop devices rushing at a barrier in the Middle East that they wanted to stop, or was this something they turn over to law enforcement as a mechanism for not having the modern day white Bronco drive down 95 unnecessarily? I don't know. So what was the nature of the hack, just so we understand? Even when you don't think or know you're connected, like my tire example, you are. Most of these cars are connected via something called Uconnect and the Sprint network. And that's how they enabled the hack. And by the way, this was a lot of engineering. This was not, you know, somebody on a weekend hackathon, as we often hear about, you know, a couple of high school kids. This was a pretty significant engineering hack. I think it was in excess of a year of organizing it. But what it allowed them to do is gain access to the head unit. And once you're there, there's no security. Who has security inside their wireless printer? You may have it secured to the Wi-Fi, but in the printer itself, who thinks about, you know, when you send a document there and all the storage in your printer, etc. So if you can get inside the printer, you could have free reign. And there's examples that I don't want to take up time because I want to wrap up here. So they're inside the head unit. There's no security, and guess what? Malware, just like taking over, you know, you hear about all these things, taking over a computer, whatever movies you watch and see, took over the head unit of the vehicle. This gave them access to something called the controlled area network. This is the thing that connects all these computers on a car with no security throughout. Okay, so this particular hack addressed 471,000 vehicles. I will tell you the recall that came out of this was 1.4 million vehicles. So if you think about the cost about dealing with these things now versus later, it's significant. As a matter of fact, Gartner's put out a number that says that to secure IoT devices, and remember it was billions a couple of slides ago, estimate $1 a device. So for those of you thinking about looking for a new business opportunity, there you go. For those of you who are hundreds or millions of these devices, time to do some budgeting. So what happened? How was the hack applied? So it starts off, and you'll see it in the video, they turn the music up and down, which actually you don't think about as really being a dangerous thing, although at the end of the video you'll see that it is. They cranked up the air, full blast, they turned the windshield wipers on. A lot of visual and audio things that were great for the video because you could see it happening. And that. Not so amusing when they were braking or accelerating. And by the way, they were sitting, I forget where in the Midwest. This vehicle was on a highway in Texas. So this is not like, okay, if I'm not in close proximity, nothing to worry about. Because it's the internet and it's the World Wide Web. So, you know, whether it's a bad acting state, country outside of the US, being connected is not always a wonderful thing. And towards the end of the video, basically they decelerated the car on the highway. Going back to the first issue, the guy in the car is going, and this is being videoed, and this is all in cooperation, he's going, hey, don't do this, this is getting dangerous. And of course they can't hear him. So again, whether it's malicious, you know, turning things off, and we can get into things like GPS hacking, totally unrelated to this, which is an interesting thing to think about as we think about the arrival of autonomous cars, because that's a whole different world of hacking, etc. You know, maybe the mirror doesn't turn left there, or your car doesn't realize it. So there are issues. So again, at the device level, you can have all this network overlay, you can do all of your things to protect the larger platforms, but I will suggest at the device level, there are things that should be addressed or thought of as you give a digital identity, or more importantly, create processing power on these platforms. So, other IoT hacks, there could be several pages of this. Medical devices, Who Watches Homeland, great piece a couple of years ago, killed the vice president by upping the pacemaker. Again, these are RF-controlled implantable medical devices. I've been in meetings in Silicon Valley where people have pointed at their insulin pumps, RF-controlled, and very concerned that they basically walk around with the device that could kill them if somebody wanted to demonstrate something. Buildings, again, big. Why worry about a hack in a building? This is plugged in, lots of processing power, etc. Smartest building in the world, supposedly in the Netherlands, the Dwight building. You walk in the room, building recognizes it's me from my smartphone and adjusts the lighting. How did it adjust the lighting? Because the lights are connected to a computer system. And so there's a little processor at the end of the light that takes a signal that says, turn the lights up, turn them down, change the color, what have you. That little processor is an access point to the network. How much security do you think is on that little processor? Because I don't care about the light, I just care about access to the network, and is there a sufficient firewall or protection mechanism? And there isn't. So again, all these connected things that seem wonderful and great are an issue. We were recently contacted, and stopped thinking about it, by a home tool company, big home tool company. Now what do they want to do? They want to put a authentication mechanism in the batteries for your power drill, saws, what have you, just like HP puts in their printer cartridges to try and make them authentic. But they're going beyond. They want to put a, and this was interesting to me, they didn't want to put it in the drill or the power device, they want to put it in the battery. Not only want to put it in the battery, they want to put a Bluetooth unit in the battery. So the battery, and not the hand unit, is going to communicate to them. Collect profile information on your usage, etc., etc. So it's going to be more than, hey, you know, this is an authentic product X battery, and go ahead and use it. As a matter of fact, they said, hey, what if we gave you an app so when you lent it to your neighbor, you could say, use it for 6 hours and don't go on anymore. I mean, some practicality. So there's a lot of things happening, and I would suggest, as often as the case, and it can go all the way back to the world of DVDs and movies, where there's minimal security, and we thought nothing of it until I think a kid in Belgium came up with 16 lines of code, and we could all burn or rip our movies onto our own DVDs, etc. So as these devices are rushing into the market, you know, it's really great. I sit on several standards committees and ISO and what have you for certification for security devices. I will tell you, they do not move at any rate that keeps up with what's happening with the products or platforms in the market. So you should definitely monitor those sorts of things. But how bad is the problem? And I would suggest it's bad. It is not a stream, a river. It is a massive flow of stuff rushing into the market, making our lives better, initially. And we need to give some consideration. So again, just to wrap up, you know, there's a challenge in security of these devices. Individually, you can do it, especially because a lot of these devices are different. You know, what's in common between your fridge, your car, and the sensor that's being used to monitor public infrastructure. Homeland Security is looking at, you know, they don't want bridges to fall down unannounced, etc. So there's a lot for waterways, roadways, bridges, monitoring our public infrastructure, goes on and on. What do they have in common? Very little, other than they're giving a digital identity, collecting critical digital data that we need to use. So again, at a lower level than Rick's overview, which was great for presentation, you know, think about, you know, what is it you need in terms of authentication. Because frankly, we're authenticating things, we don't need data protection or encryption. Why? Because the thing is going to be 1 or 2 inches away. So if it's a $1,000 bottle of wine, I don't need to hide that fact. However, on some other larger entity items, particularly to Rick's points, yes, you do need to not only hide that fact, but hide or protect the data. Current solutions may not come from existing protocols and tools, and again, I suggest that because we've seen this massive delay from bringing security to the market to actually keep up with these little devices and the microcontrollers and sensors and, and everything right down to the stuff on monitoring your bicycle or monitoring your kids' movements or your dog or your pet, or the smart meter on your home. So it goes on and on. Think about the ramifications. It's an exciting world. A lot of great movie material in this. Thank you.
Well, we hope we gave you some information that will at least tell you that you should be asking questions about IoT devices. That's number one. And that you should be interested in securing them. And what we'd like to do now is open this up to you to ask specific questions. Do I have anyone who has a specific question right away? Bill?
There's an LG refrigerator that includes a web browser. Not because it helps keep food fresh, but because it differentiates that refrigerator from all other refrigerators. As the cost of radios, processors, and storage continues to fall like a rock, we're seeing functionality included gratuitously in things, not because it adds to its functionality, but because somebody might think up a use for it in the future, and because it differentiates things. Help me.
I mean, yeah, so that's the sort of the product marketing approach. It's the Steve Jobs product marketing approach. You don't know you need it until we show you. Who needed an iPad before it existed? Who needed a web browsing refrigerator before you demonstrated it? I would suggest in some of these cases, and maybe it's bad product marketing, there's coming additional capabilities that they have not yet introduced, but the first step is to bring connectivity to the product or platform and then introduce the next pieces. IBM, way back when, and when I was there, was really good at this. They would introduce a product and you'd see 25% of it when it came to market because there's another 75% of things coming. So I don't know if a web browser in itself does it, and if that's it, it probably goes away relatively quickly or soon. But more important, and again, I guess to today's topic, and so that's an access to your home environment, and Nest is collecting the movement through your house, and maybe this fridge is going to collect, eating and or activity levels. Again, for an elderly parent, it might be a good thing. It may not be something you want to share with somebody who's monitoring your house for other reasons. So some thought has to begin as all these devices connect up and begin broadcasting, beyond your Wi-Fi network, what's going on inside.
Yeah, and Louis, it's so interesting to think about this because 5, 6, 7 years ago, TVs started coming out with internet connections. They had Ethernet ports in them, right? And you thought, well, what are they doing? Why do I have an Ethernet port in this television? And they really weren't doing much with it, were they? But 4 or 5 years going forward, suddenly they were enabling the capabilities in these televisions that actually let them track what was happening with the television, how it was being used, what channels were being watched, what programs were being watched. This plethora of data, and being the resident skeptic here, and conservative lawyer type, right? I'm thinking, my goodness, what consent did they get? What did they tell the consumers about what was going to happen with this device and how they were going to collect the data? And, Rick, you guys have done a great job in sort of managing around that.
Yeah, I think that with the refrigerator, they have an idea of what they're going to do with that, and part of the thing with that is they may not want to reveal all of it, right? And also, that's part of the skeptic in me as well. And they're probably going to be testing it with different individuals, right? So they'll take a small subset and test what they're going to be doing with it, because now they have these things networked. They're certainly gathering data. Who knows what data they're gathering at this point? And it brings me back to my point. What do you need a web browser on your refrigerator for? Is it going to be for recipes when you're there? Are you going to keep track of what's in the fridge? And who is going to get that data? And what are they going to do with it? Is LG going to use it? Are they going to eventually sell it to a health insurance company? Are certain health insurance companies going to say, we'll give you a break on your insurance if you let us know what's in your refrigerator? You know, these things are happening with cars. We see it, right? You plug in something to your car and you get a discount based upon how you drive.
Rick, is there any kind of regulatory guidance that we should be interested in to protect consumers?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, if you can page maybe backwards or forwards, I'm not sure, maybe backwards, I'll give you a URL reference. You know, the FTC, and I don't know, Rick, whether Pitney Bowed was involved in the workshops, but back in 2014, the FTC ran a number of workshops on the Internet of Things because they are the entity that is arguably most responsible for giving guidance and regulation on data privacy in the United States. We really don't have any regulation on data privacy, if you want to know the truth. But they held a series of workshops with people in the industry, and then came out with a report in January of 2015. And the URL is somewhere out there. Go back 2 slides. The URL is out there if you want to see it. I created a short URL just to make it easy so that you could write it down. One slide back. Wait, one more slide back. Backwards. You're going forward. All right, it's somewhere in there. So there it is, right there. Okay, so there's a URL to this report. So if you're a company that's thinking about integrating solutions and offering up IoT devices, IoT solutions, you ought to read this report because it talks about some of the recommendations. And most importantly, what it says is notice and consent. Those are or notice and choice. Those are the 2 things that the FTC says you have to give consumers, right? You have to give them clear and conspicuous notice, and they give lots of ideas about how to do that, of what you're going to do with their data. Just don't collect it and not tell them. And secondly, you have to give them a choice. Should they collect the data or not? I was laughing about this because as I was walking over from the parking garage, I realized I forgot to lock my car. So what did I do? Did I run back, which I probably should have done, I could use the exercise, but I didn't run back to my car. I got onto my phone and I went to my little app here and I said, lock my car. Okay, my car talks to the internet. And I think that's a wonderful thing, but do I have a choice as to what data they're collecting on me? They know where I'm going. They know how fast I'm driving. They know a lot of things about me that maybe I never thought about. Now, some of these companies like OnStar actually did run into some resistance about connected car. And so they have a way that you can actually turn all of this off on your vehicle. Because even if you don't pay for the subscription to OnStar, your car is still tracking you. It's still transmitting information. Unless you go to the dealer and specifically have them turn this off. Otherwise, they know where you are. And this is, this is the thing that scares us on these the vehicle tires, right? I can't turn that off unless I take those valves out and replace them and not have that feature.
So while regulatory guidance is starting to formulate, Louis, is it too late for privacy from a developer's perspective? Have we already given it up?
Answer.
You have one of these, right? Google and Apple know what elevation you're sitting, and they know that I just walked 25 feet. So.
Yeah, I just got a text alert on you. Don't come that close.
Hey, Louis, I'm one up on you because I just scanned all the Bluetooths. I got a bunch of you with your Bluetooths open.
Right.
I actually tried to pair with a few of you. They rejected it, but it was fun.
Are you worried?
And then the next thing I did was I scanned all all those of you who are connected to the Wi-Fi. I just scanned you. Okay, I know what you call your phone. I know some of the things about your phone. I know your Mac ID.
There you go.
Interesting, interesting.
And there's
yes, we have a question back here.
Yeah, so we're all scared, right? I mean,
it's working. It's working.
we saw the waterfall, and I thought it was really, I think, timely of that hack into that Jeep Cherokee, because we continue to build things that can potentially damage us or hurt us or defame us or whatever. And it seems to me, I mean, we had a pretty nice introduction as Gary McGraw gave the CTC had a thing, or the Patterson Club, I think in November, and he talked about it's really the responsibility of the engineers themselves to police themselves, and the only way we can protect ourselves is to build better, more secure things from the get-go, from the ground up. So I see you squinting about that. I mean, it seems like everything's out, the cat's out of the bag now, we're trying to scramble to protect ourselves.
Now, is there any developer in the audience? Do we have anyone who is a developer? Yes. And I was hoping the two of you should have raised your hands, absolutely. So, now I know Pitney Bowed is interested in security, and I know Lewis is from an encryption perspective, but typically, is a developer interested in security, or is a developer interested in getting a product out the door?
It depends on what you're building, right? And so, from Pitney Bowed's perspective, what we built primarily, at least in the past, were machines that printed currency, right? Meters. So, and they printed them in environments where they were hostile. So the hackers, in our case, were the users. So we had to put a lot of security in just to get approvals. When you start talking about products, the main thing that I think developers are concerned about is cool features, right? And that's what ends up happening. So, you know, there are more and more developers who are more and more privacy conscious, and that's a good thing. But they're not necessarily the ones that make the decisions about what gets built. You know, we come up with great technology, and it can be used in lots of different ways. So I don't know that it's the responsibility of the developers. We try to do things as securely as we can with privacy consciousness in mind. There are a lot of great technologies that can help with that. But it really is up to the consumers in a lot of ways, and regulatory agencies to demand that data be kept private, that people's rights are respected.
And on the table, you're going to be left, we'll be left with some handouts that we hope you'll take with you to help you understand what our responsibilities are and what we hope that you'll be asking for.
Hey, Pat, I'm still waiting for Lewis to answer the question, is it too late?
Yeah. So I think the summary answer is way too late, but you know, because if you think about it in the day and age we live in, so first of all, to the devices, the thing I held up is 15 to 35 cents, so you can give a digital identity to anything in your business now. Come see me, we can do that. The battery device, Bluetooth, you know, we're sensors $4 to $6 now to create a device that's going to broadcast through your smartphone up to the cloud, blah, blah, blah. So you can do things in your business if you want to do that. You know, and it doesn't take a lot to add security, but, you know, I will, you know, map this. Privacy, by the way, is policy. So security, you know, and again, just I apologize, Pat. So we do more than encrypt because it could be authenticate. And this is, again, so people don't even understand at a base level maybe even what they need. So that's the starting point, including brilliant engineers. We met with a medical device company whose customers are saying, we need security, tell us about it. And the CEO actually sat in the meeting. Why? Because he was talking at a function in the medical device world 2 weeks later, and he was like, oh, this is great material, I should really know this. And they've been doing it for years. So I think you have a struggle because people are domain experts in a very, you know, siloed domain typically. Great engineers, great whatever. And I think that from, you know, privacy, which is policy, so I would suggest in EU, what passes for privacy here would not pass there. So you have some issues of defining it, but when it comes to certifications, etc., who's certifying our car tires? I mean, unfortunately, the backdrop to all of this is we need less government, and maybe in some places we do. But nobody is proactively saying, you know, that the light bulb that can be used to now start a fire being sold at Home Depot because it's on the internet. You know, look, I can change colors with my iPad, has been hacked. And you go and watch these hacks. So who's regulating that light bulb? I mean, you know, again, the devices just are growing exponentially. So I would suggest that in a race to catch up, in the best case scenario, you could pick the critical things like turning a medical device off or on unintentionally. The guy who sat on a plane and hacked through the entertainment system into the plane, because no longer is it a wire from the pilot back to the wing. It's an RF device. There are 2,500 on average RF devices on every commercial aircraft, growing to 10,000. Who has asked Delta what is the security components for those RF devices? Because everybody can take a laptop on the plane that has Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and all the other things that are in my smartphone that can talk.
In the back here,
we're behind.
in the back here, you had a question.
Yeah, I know you talked about regulations and like the FDA or the FCC. What about like the IEEE? Do they have any standards coming down the pipe? Because if you think about the 40,000 view here, every device is going to have personal information, and every device is going to have perhaps anonymous information. And we don't mind anonymous information because it helps the whole world, it helps devices get fine-tuned. It's happened to us all over, we don't even know it anyways with A/B testing and all the cloud services. But does the IEEE have any sort of standards that say, here's a buzzword, a standard number that we can know if a device has this standard associated with it, then we know it's going to be encrypted end-to-end, we know it's going to sit encrypted, and we know that our private has our ability to tweak what we want, and we know that our anonymous is a yes/no, and if it's a yes, then we know based on some standard along with privacy standards that they are guaranteeing that there's no way to backtrack it based on some math. So I don't know if there's any standards like that, because that would really make it easy. Then you just build your device to a standard, and then you don't have to worry about, the politics of it as much.
Who would like to address that? Rick?
I can address it, having gone through a lot of different certifications, government certifications and things. A lot of the standards, like IEEE, describe how to do something, how to implement a particular algorithm. It doesn't tell you necessarily what to implement. And other standards, a lot of the security standards that are out there that people test against, require the person who is looking for the certification to put together some sort of policy statement that says, this is what I'm protecting and this is how I'm protecting it. And then they test against that. So essentially you can say, as a developer, I am protecting that my data in transit between a device and the cloud is protected and it is secured. I'm going to authenticate both ends. I'm going to encrypt the data as it goes across. But when it gets up into the cloud, who knows? I could be sharing that with anybody, right? And so it really, unfortunately, leaves the user up to looking at these sort of security policies that are written and determining what is secured. And so there's not really good standards for that. There are some organizations and some standards that have what's called a protection profile for certain types of systems, but the certifications are so hard to get and so onerous that very few people actually go through this process.
Rick, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, so good point there. The good news is there are standards for the IoT, about 400 of them. I participate in some at the ISO level, and again, keep in mind that quite often, these standards committees also, by the way, everybody sitting there, typically has something in the game. We're all companies sitting there, so there are agendas at foot. I think the IEEE is 2143, I think, for IoT. I can check that number later. IEEE 1363, which is public key cryptography, hasn't been active in 8 years, 10 years. So needless to say, it hasn't kept up. So standards are good. Who's enforcing them? How do you certify them? Who's paying for it? What's being produced? Rick does for many things because they're using financial platforms. But it falls off very quickly. If we have a Fitbit on, who can tell me what the security certification on that Bluetooth device is?
And, and as the resident skeptic, these standards are so misleading. Do not take comfort in the fact that somebody says, oh, well, my device is certified to, the IEEE standard. When Rick was speaking, he talked not about any particular standard or function, but rather you could see that they spent a lot of time thinking about the entire solution, right? It's not any one component, because the components can be secure as all get out, right? I'll go to Lewis and he'll give me a nice secure component, but the component isn't the solution. You talked about key management as an example, right? Encryption works really well. You know, it's hard to break, as you see from the government's fight with Apple.
Easy
Fine.
to bypass.
Easy to bypass because what?
Poor implementation.
Yeah, it's poor implementation, poor key management, those types of things make it vulnerable.
Yeah, and there's always this usability thing as to you know, how do I make it so that it's ultra secure, right? The best way is connected to nothing, right? And how do I make it so that it's usable? What happens? You know, password security is a very, you know, small example, but a good one. How do I restore someone's password if they forget it, right? I force them to have this really complex password and then they forget it. And so eventually you have to have some sort of backdoor, otherwise they can't get to their data and they can't do what they need to do their job. And so that's
And look at the
a backdoor.
position that's put Apple in.
Yeah.
Jason?
Apple is unwilling and uninvolved, but able.
Sure. Jason?
Yeah, it's wonderful to have this expert on this. But it's dawned on me, one of the crucial things for the implementation forward for the IoT is that you have a unique identification for everything in order to work. Who is controlling the directory of the IP addresses and also the assignment? And is that currently domained by each manufacturer, dominated manufacturer in each product category?
Anyone want to tackle?
I mean, so just a quick technical response. So you have a device with a computing capability. It may have an address from something called IPv6, which, you know, from IPv4 allowed you to gazillionly multiply. But the majority of IoT devices don't even get to that level. So I will tell you that, you know, many of the places we deal with, an NFC, an RFID, and other things giving digital identities, it's really an industry. So GS1, ISO, and what have you will tell you that they're using the equivalent of a MAC ID in these small things, so it's not a formal structure. And they'll tell you that, hey, it's burned into the silicon, so it's a permanent ID number, you can use it. And I will tell you, you can go on the internet, and there's a half a dozen sources out of Asia where I can buy programmable IDs, so I can easily implement and clone anything you have with very little technical expertise. So that's the state of affairs.
Yeah, and I think too, unique ID is a double-edged sword. It's great to be able to individually identify a device, but then I can individually identify a device so I can track it. So you need to think about what the use case is and what you're trying to do with it.
Way in the back, gentleman standing.
You're right. Oh, sorry. I'm going to ask a question later. I think we all are scared more than one person. I've been scared for years of the CISO for 15 years, so I've always been scared. Every 2 years I've asked this question. And I noticed there's no CIA or FBI people here. So I'm asking the other end of the spectrum. So all we talk about is how industry, in essence, volunteering the standards and implementing based on the standards. We have bloodline vendors, right? So we don't really hear is how are we going to make this truly offense of using things that's affecting everybody's life, privacy, out there, either by companies deliberately still, which is a crime, but we also don't hear anything about banks accidentally leaking or someone coming in and getting something out. They don't get penalized in the way that you would imagine if something like health care company, you know, which one last year, losing tens of millions of people's ID and information. But you don't hear much about what does it mean in terms of helping stopping that flow. I know Rick and Lewis said all kinds of meetings and whatnot. What is that being done on the executive branch of the criminal justice branch to say we have to put a stop to this work? Because facing on the industry, I don't think it would be a solution. You already said that there's no solution from the industry.
Would our lawyer like to tackle that one?
Yeah, you know, the answer here is government isn't going to solve the problem of identity fraud. We, in this community, are going to solve the problems of identity fraud, right? I'm counting on Lewis to provide me the components. I'm counting on Rick to provide me the solutions, and I'm counting on the consumer of these products and solutions to be smart enough not to get bamboozled by somebody offering the free download onto your machines. Okay, because that's the real problem. It's the people vector, not necessarily the just only the technology.
I have a follow-up question to that, because I think there are two examples I would quote. My wife bought a car. One day after, the phone number she gave the car dealer in Darien must have sold number away. She's getting 15 text and messages and phone call a day now about cars. Now, we explicitly told him and mark it on the form that says cannot resubmit whatever the way it is for other agencies, right? And the phone call coming to my home every night on no call list, they keep calling, even though they're on the no call list. So there had to be a way to make this stronger statement out as a whole. Maybe say industry effort to say, look, we have to all vote on this and make sure this don't happen anymore. But I'm sure everybody at dinner time would have at least one or two co-calling, market phone call, and they're all on the no call list.
Yeah, and it's a great problem to talk about, maybe a little off topic from the Internet of Things issue, because I think it goes well beyond that. But it's something that maybe the cybersecurity group wants to talk about in the
we'll
future.
consider that. Yes.
So how close are we to the Internet of human things, where you have a child and immediately they're implanted with an ID? You do it with pets.
So the technology has been here for 5, 6, 8 years. There's actually a glass enclosed RF device that's been used sporadically, to test things. And there was a club in Spain where you didn't carry any ID, but rather you were injected in your shoulder with a chip, so you didn't have to worry about, using anything like your little badge or watch at Disney to get on a ride. Most of your dogs have been there for years already, etc. So the technology's there. This goes back to policy and what have you. So it becomes a threshold issue. And ironically, in this country where we, it's hard to educate people in this, so we're all concerned about our privacy, and yet everybody here is carrying out a device broadcasting 30, 40 things about yourself. There's about 15 pages of data collected every time you key something into Bing or Google, on and on it goes. So there's a certain naivete that allows this to have already occurred. Enforcement, the last question, is a different issue. The NSA, on the positive front, is very actively working to make sure there are tools in place, because something that's IoT and cybersecurity related is something called quantum computing, which is not only on the immediate horizon. MIT 3 weeks ago announced an initial, I'm going to call it a simple quantum device, but I will tell you what quantum computing involves, and there's arguments that at least one exists in Virginia now. All the security used for all of your financial banking, etc., becomes in real time breakable. So all the crypto, that little padlock that shows up in your browser, real time breakable.
And there still is somewhat of an aversion to having something implanted in your body. People are not thrilled about that concept right now. Maybe they'll get over it at some point, but that's not the current
I'm sure they
situation.
want to know where people are in a high security prison or in those kind of level of security, and you kind of wonder what policy discussions are taken. But when do you give up the right to privacy?
Yeah, I mean, we do it all the time, right? We carry around.
You sign it away.
We sign it away.
Agreement.
We carry around
Sure.
cards, right, that we go to retailers with, or we load apps on our phones where they track us all the time, and it's so that we can get a free coffee or a discount at the supermarket, and they have tons of data on us and our habits, but we see a benefit in that. And so I think it'll come, when you're at the hospital and you have that child, and they say, we can implant this device in your child, and should your child ever be, kidnapped, right, we'll be able to
That'll
find
be the
it,
one
we'll be able
that pushes them over the edge.
right, and do you want to do that? And so, but that device is there, and you and your child can be tracked.
But Rick, your point is that we're already doing this voluntarily. How many of you have walked into some store and they say we provide free Wi-Fi? Boy, isn't that nice of them, right? They're so nice to provide you free Wi-Fi.
Never.
You know what they're doing?
Never
They're
do that.
tracking where you're going. They want to see where all the traffic is going. And they track and they see, well, a lot of people turn right when they come into the store through this door, and they're attracted to this kind of thing, and then they seem to avoid, you know, this area of the store, and then and they've got maps, they're heat maps that they develop, right?
Yeah.
We see this all the time. Google, God bless them, right? They gave me a free operating system on my phone. Thank goodness, right? Aren't they nice? Do you know that they're going to be able to predict the results of the election long before anybody else predicts it? Because they don't care about me specifically, but they care about the masses of the data, right? How many people are coming towards the polling places, right? All of that. So we're already there, but not with the babies yet. I think you have to be 2 years old before the parents give them the phone now.
Suzanne, you had a question?
I do. I know we're going to have a next session more in depth on this, but I'm curious I've heard a lot about privacy and security, but what I haven't heard you mention is how that impacts companies' business resilience or business continuity planning. And I'm especially curious from Pitney Bowed, you used the example of your new product, and just some high-level thoughts on that and sort of what your general recommendations are. And obviously there's legal implications of that as well.
Yeah, so from our perspective, a lot of the things that we provide are machines to our customers, right? And so we see it as protecting their continuity in a lot of ways, right? If we've got these large, I showed these big machines, right, that are the size of this whiteboard behind me, and when that machine goes down, right, the customer's business is down. They're not sending out bills in some cases, or they're not sending out marketing material. That actually affects their bottom line. And so, that example is a business continuity thing where by keeping those machines up and running at their peak efficiency, we're helping our customers. If you look at the GE example with the engines, right, they are monitoring that, keeping those planes flying, reducing their costs. So I think there's a lot of goodness that can come from Internet of Things. I know we've scared you a little bit this morning, but there are things that we can do as businesses to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, right? Now, is it going to be perfect? No, there's always a trade-off. As soon as you put something that's broadcasting an ID or communicating wirelessly or on a network, right, that opens up, something. And there are ways that people can get into that. Developers can put things on devices, but there are lots of benefits from it as well.
So just a quick follow back to that, then if you look at it as you're helping a company's business continuity planning, are you all also looking then at your service level agreements on how you now just took on additional liability by doing that?
So we've actually changed, with that product, we changed our whole business model around how we do service for them, and we're actually guaranteeing, it's an outcome based, so we're guaranteeing outcomes, including guaranteeing productivity gains for those companies if they, allow us to analyze the data and make recommendations as to how they should change their operations. So it's totally transformed that business model, and there's a couple other businesses that we're doing the same thing. And you can do that with really any business.
Leon?
Yeah, I can make a short comment. I'm always reminded of what Mark Twain once dryly said about Wagner's music. It's not as bad as it sounds. So, having said that, I was peripherally involved with some effort in Detroit now, major, we talked about cars and automotive industry. And so, there's a major effort now with regard to these autonomous vehicles, where pretty much all big car manufacturers working with reputable cryptography companies to design these new protocols for communicating between vehicles and the infrastructure, which is going to be critically important if these vehicles will ever come to existence. And I reviewed these protocols and I looked at how it's done. It's a competent work of engineering on those things. So for example, we talked about small devices that enable to execute certain cryptographic computational transformation in a given period of time. But it's not necessarily always bad, because if each act of communication can be enacted with a new key, ephemeral key that disappears after each act, then hacking this key becomes useless. So these kind of things are being carefully reviewed and implemented in those protocols. And it's all driven by liability issues. So in case when there is a serious liability issues, and we know from the General Motors and other examples, that liability can cost huge amount of money, people really put the best brains to do those kind of things. So you can check it on the net.
Thank you, Liam. I think that will conclude the panel. I'd like to thank Rick Harris, who leads the technology and telecommunications and outsourcing practice at Dave Pitney, Louis Parks, CEO of SecureRF, and Rick Ryan, who's a fellow in the Strategic Technology and Innovation Center at Pitney Bowed, for their assistance this morning. Thank you very much for your presentations.